How bad are the alleged leaks by the Trump administration of supposed war plans against the Houthis in Yemen? This is Kotal, and let's get into it. So, a story appeared this week through the Atlantic magazine by editor Jeffrey Goldberg that he had been invited into a signals check consisting of the top national security team of the Trump administration as they discussed policy towards then upcoming strikes on the Houthi rebels. I'm going to give a brief overview of what Goldberg represents occurred in that chain and attempt to give some general context to it. For some very brief background, the United States has been conducting military operations against the Houthis for some time in this region. Ostensibly, the goal for the U.S. here was to arrest their disruption of maritime traffic through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, which the Houthis claim they're doing to injure Israeli interests in solidarity with Hamas and the Palestinians. The reference strikes that we're going to be talking about by the United States, though, indicate an increase in tempo for those operations compared to what was occurring during the Biden administration. As Goldberg notes, use of this kind of app, the Signal app, to conduct various administrative and logistical coordination is not uncommon. That's both sides having encryption. But he notes that being invited as a journalist to this type of thing for an administration is not normal, as well as some of the material he alleges were discussed within. Now, he claims, that is Goldberg, that he was invited to the chain by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, initially on the 11th, and then later sent an invite to what was described as the Houthi Principals Committee, or PC Small Group. Now, these groups represent the senior and expert parties of an administration for discussing and developing U.S. national security policy. So that brings us to Thursday, March the 13th, and it appears that the communication in this channel then was fairly normal, with various agency and cabinet leaders naming what is called a Tiger Team or a Quick Action Team to help with coordination on a particular subject, in this case related to the Houthis over the next 72 hours. Now, this type of coordination is mundane and not unusual, in my opinion, as establishing POCs or points of contact is not outside the normal administrative task you would see over this type of communication system. And by the way, this ended the communications for that Thursday. Now, by the way, the POC listing and note that something is coming down the pipe, as this did, is very beneficial for a journalist to have in their hip pocket. So I can see why Goldberg decided to stick around, even though he claims he didn't think the thread was real and somebody was kind of pulling his chain. Now, on Friday, March the 14th, the initial communication from NSA Mike Waltz informing the team that additional guidance was there on their high side or classified email inboxes is again pretty normal, meaning that there was specific communication guidance through the proper classified systems to inform them of what was going on. This is very mundane. I can't tell you how many times I got a phone call saying, hey, you need to check your high side email and go into a skiff and go do it, because you're not sitting in your skiff. You're out and about doing other things. So skiff is a secure compartment for information. Basically, a place you can look through check your secret or top secret email, whatever you have. Now, again, informing a group to check their high side is common and not out the ordinary. But then we get into something that is a bit abnormal. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance, who notes in the thread that he was not on site, initiates a policy discussion specifically centering around the timing and messaging of the operation, which then several other members of the PC engage with. I'm not going to get into the details of it. You can read the Atlantic article. It's in the description to see all those details. While there is nothing that Goldberg notes within this chat that appears to be specifically classified, the subject does represent sensitive policy discussions that should be guarded a bit closer, if for no other reason than to avoid potential embarrassment and publicly airing disagreements, which are better left behind closed doors. At this point on Friday, we have something not good, but fundamentally nothing beyond egg on the face of the administration, so to speak. Saturday, March 15th is where we get into the wild stuff. Goldberg claims that 2 hours before the strikes began, Secretary Hicks has sent out a message detailing various aspects of the upcoming military operation, quoting, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and attack sequencing. Now, he does not include this specific information here, So it is impossible to verify whether or not the information in the chat reflects what he claims it is, or if his characterization of that information, if it did occur, is accurate to that description. On the other hand, revelation of such information, if it was accurately described and did indeed include classified information, as his characterization would suggest, would mean Goldberg would potentially face legal jeopardy if he released it to the public in detail. A quick sideline here, just because classified information has slipped into the public domain does not absolve one from the legal obligation not to share that information yourself. Just because it's out there doesn't mean you can share it yourself. It's still classified, and you can still get arrested for it. So honestly, it is in the eye of the beholder at this point as to whether one believes Goldberg's assertion here, or whether one believes the later assertions by Secretary Hegseth and others that no classified information was in this chat, and including any kind of war plans or operational details. Although he doesn't use that specific term, I don't believe, operational details. Now, an important note here, though, is that the National Security Administration responded to an inquiry regarding the chat from Goldberg after the event, confirming that, and again I quote here, "This appears to be an authentic message chain, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain." Keep in mind, though, I'm not sure what Goldberg sent them as far as the chain, if it was part of the earlier Friday and Thursday material, or if it was material from that Saturday that was potentially damaging. That's an important note. So where does this leave us? Well, at the very least, there is certainly an embarrassment for the Trump administration, at least on the surface. The first issue is with NSA Mike Waltz, who, if Goldberg's account is true, invited him to the chat, perhaps mistaking him for someone else. You know, he could have seen another Goldberg he was thinking, or another JG, and he just had the wrong guy added. Could have been something as simple as that. Now, it could be that Goldberg is not being truthful about how he got access, but I don't know. It seems plausible, at least to me, that NSA Waltz just might have made a mistake. And the bigger mistake, besides adding him, was failing to properly vet the chat and do any checks on it to verify the participants. That, I think, is the bigger issue here, at least as far as Waltz is concerned. The second issue is with VP Vance, who, if the chat is an accurate reflection, should not have used this method of communication, which up to that point had been used, in my view, properly for low-level coordination communication stuff, such as setting up contact groups and letting you know you have high-side emails to check. Now, Vance was, again, off-site, and he might have just answered without thinking, hey, I'll just air my concerns on this chat through this platform. But he should have known better and said, hey, I want to have a discussion with whoever, whether that be NSA Waltz, whether that be Secretary Hegseth, whoever, to try and set up a meeting to discuss his concerns. Now, I think at this point, Vance, if this is accurate, is wandering into dangerous ground. But I still view it as more on the embarrassing side versus damaging to national security side. It just makes you look bad and unprofessional versus actually letting out operational secrets. But that brings us to the third issue that I see with Secretary of Defense Hegseth and whether or not he did in fact share classified operational details before the operation occurred over the app. Now, this portion of the article lacks any ability to verify it, but also by its nature, that is not unusual given the sensitive information at play here. So one has to weigh the veracity of Goldberg versus Hegseth and as to who you believe. One has to be misrepresenting it. That's the bottom line. Now, if Hegseth did share that information as Goldberg describes it, it seems to me, at the very least, to potentially violate operational security and potentially endanger U.S. military operations. Personally, though, I'm not sure why Secretary Hegseth would include this information in the chat, as it served no real purpose from a communication standpoint. And if he waited the few hours until after the strikes, it would have had the same impact, and they could have all, done their emojis in response to it. So it seems like a hell of an oversight. And again, Hegseth is, he was a junior military leader, but you even as a company grade officer, you learn this stuff, and I find it. I'm not sure I believe it. I'll be honest, but it's plausible. It certainly is plausible. I will say that. So. We'll see, though, if more information on the chat gets released, especially on this third component. The other components, again, I'm not as concerned about, although there's some juicy details as far as policy developments that I think are interesting. But this could be a major scandal for the administration that might even, in the worst case, require some resignations. Or it could be Goldberg overselling what the chat actually was, making a mountain over a molehill to score some political points. That's an equally possible scenario as well, to be honest with you. Now, at the very least, though, Goldberg certainly has put the Trump administration on the back foot, and at least the chat itself appears to be real to an extent, and his invites seems to be a significant oversight on their part. So that part of the scandal seems confirmed to me at this point. But what do you all think about this whole situation? Should we trust Goldberg? Should we trust Hexeth? Are both kind of somewhat true and trying to avoid embarrassment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Now, this is Kotel, and thanks again for watching.